So this video is the deepest piece of content we've ever made about the tech sales and SDR interview process. I know a lot of people looking at this career now that it has grown in popularity are concerned. Maybe you don't have experience. Maybe you're just trying to get your foot in the door, and every application that you look at has 2,000 plus applicants. The best way that I wanted to address a lot of the common questions and make a video that I wish I had when I broke into tech sales in late 2019, early 2020, is I actually brought on an SDR manager for this conversation that is actively hiring. They have hired people with tons of experience, and they've also hired people that had no experience whatsoever. And we dive deep into everything that they consider when it comes to how to evaluate a candidate, how a candidate even stands out and gets an interview in the first place. And lastly, for reference, the reason that I wanted to make this video is Elijah actually made a post recently about how an SDR opening that he posted on LinkedIn had over 2,000 applicants. And of the 2,000 applicants, 15 people even messaged him in the first place. And I cannot stress this enough. It may seem on the outside looking in like it's impossible to get your foot in the door. And I would borderline argue that if you're actually putting in work, if you're actually doing what you need to do, it's pretty easy to stand out right now. There are so many low quality applicants. There are so many people not even doing the basics of what you should when it comes to applying for sales jobs. This video will have genuinely everything you need. It's literally the video I wish I had when I broke into tech sales in late 2019. We talk about everything from standing out in the interview process, how to crush your first round interview, how to crush the interview with the sales manager, how to crush your mock call and discovery call, and just tons of things that I and Elijah have experienced ourselves now in the higher levels community, both coaching tons of people myself at higherlevels.com and Elijah now literally filtering through tens of thousands of applicants to hire SDRs on his team. Elijah, this was an awesome conversation. Really appreciate the time and insights. And I know everyone watching is going to get a ton out of this video. Hey, everybody, back with Elijah this week, who has been on the channel before, previously as an SDR, and he's now an SDR manager. We're going to do a deep dive into what it takes to break into an SDR role. He is actively hiring and conducting interviews for SDRs right now. And actually, the reason I wanted to have him on today is because of a post he recently made on LinkedIn. This is a true story that we're going to dive into and pick apart in much more detail. But just for reference, before I kick it over to Elijah, a recent listing they had for an SDR job opening had over 2,000 applicants. Only 15 people contacted him. 8 reached out on LinkedIn, 4 cold called, a few more made Loom videos. Elijah, we're going to dive deep into this today and not only share what people are doing wrong, but certainly what you have seen work really well for people you have actually hired yourself. Maybe a quick intro on your side and we'll kick it off.
Yeah, appreciate it. And excited to be back, Eric. It's funny. I think we did this last time. I think it was a year ago. Yeah, so excited to be back. And right now I'm actually an SDR manager, like Eric mentioned, moved up from an enterprise SDR to an enterprise BDR manager. So really excited. It's interesting now. I'm seeing things from the other point of view here. And like Eric mentioned, which we'll definitely dive deeper into it, is the poor outreach. It's insane. There's really no competition out there for a lot of you guys.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, and maybe as a starting point, I really want to deep dive. I think this is one major component of breaking into tech sales today. And quite frankly, I don't see any deep dives about this at all. So I think, correct me at any point if you disagree or have a different philosophy, but certainly our take now is if you're trying to get an SDR job or any tech sales job for that matter, if you're not messaging the hiring manager, you're not even going to be considered. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that for you? Like, what's kind of your philosophy as like a minimum criteria to even consider someone for just an interview, let alone a job offer?
Yeah, minimum things. I would boil it down to 3 things, right? First one is that basic outreach, right? Preferably my channels that I am very active on is phone and LinkedIn. I do check emails from time to time, but yeah, basic standards is you reaching out to a manager. The second thing would be reaching out to either a rep or a recruiter at my company, right? I have a big policy at my company where if anyone reaches out to you, you let me know, because I love to see people who are proactive. The third thing I would say is, and this might sound strange or something, but to some people, but it's really having like a simple, clean LinkedIn. I've had, oddly enough, a lot of people reaching out to me that had very grandiose type of LinkedIns, and I checked their resume. They were working at like a retail store. No, nothing wrong with that. But when they're saying they're going to close millions of dollars and generate millions, just have a simple LinkedIn, simple outreach, and reach out to some folks at my company. I'm a manager who promotes that a lot. Maybe not every manager, but those are the minimum things for myself.
Yeah. And obviously like not messaging you in the first place is like a non-starter. It's not going to get us anywhere. But in addition to, you know, this LinkedIn example, or maybe they're misrepresenting their experience, let's focus specifically on this messaging component, right? If I'm an SDR messaging you, or an SDR hopeful trying to break into tech sales, let's start with the bad. Like, what are messages that there's good intention behind them, but they don't hit with you? They clearly are just not resonating on many different levels. Give us a couple examples there.
Yeah, I'll give you two. I had one. This one girl reached out to me. It seemed like she had decent experience just from glancing at her LinkedIn. But then when I checked the copy, firstly she's introducing herself, saying like, "Hi, my name is Eric Finch," for example. That was her name, and I'm like, I can clearly see your name, right? Just getting to the point with something she didn't do. But the worst part was, and this might sound obvious, she forgot to, I guess, leave out the AI part where it said, ChatGPT said, "Say this to the manager, and I think he will stand out." Little basic things, and I just left her on red, frankly. And then she bumped me back up. But I responded. I said, like, I can't accept this, right? That's one example. I had another example that wasn't the best, which someone sent me an extremely, I think it was like 4 or 5 paragraphs worth of content saying, "This is what I've done. This is who I am." And I'm like, "Look, I'm busy. If you see my calendar, I'm in meetings 8, 10 hours a day, pretty much." Getting to the point. On the flip side of that, though, an example I can think of right off the top of my head is, as soon as I made a post through myself as well as my recruiter in my company, I had somebody reach out to me immediately and said, "Elijah," it was something to the effect of, "Elijah, I know screens can be difficult. I'm checking your pipeline. We use Lever as our tool to manage candidates." He said it was tough to check those because those tools have APIs or AI filters that reduce great candidates down where you can't see them or have visibility. I want to reach out to you and chat. And so that was sure. He said a lot more quicker and more brief than I did, but that caught my attention. I accepted his connection and we hopped on a call right away. So that's an example of someone who had brief, simple messaging. He didn't have that much experience, I will say that, but that didn't really change my mind on wanting to talk to him at least.
Yeah, and that's really great perspective as well. And I think one thing that I'm thinking of, if I'm trying to break in, right, and especially if you've never been in the sales game before, I'd love to get your 2 cents and opinion on the most effective, if any, channel. So, for instance, what I'm getting at is, as an example, I can find your phone number and email online. I can send you a LinkedIn message. I could also even pre-record like a screen capture, make like a 60 to 90-second elevator pitch about why I'm interested in the company. Is there anything that you give preferential treatment to? Or as an example, at the end of the day, is it really just about the contents of the message that stand out? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, good question. So 2 things on that. One, I'll answer for myself, and then like generally other managers, because I know I'm big on cold calls, right? I love when people can either find my phone number and call me, or, and this is a tip to everyone watching, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or have any outreach to me, I'm nice enough to just give you my number and I'll say, just call me, right? And again, a lot of people don't do that, like Eric kind of mentioned at the beginning of the call or the podcast here. So I prefer calls, and I like simple to the point pitches of yourself and what you're trying to get out of it. I also do like LinkedIn. I do not really respond to emails because my emails are flooded. I'm just very much more active on LinkedIn. As for what I've seen through hiring managers at my company, as well as other managers that I know, a lot of them do prefer LinkedIn. LinkedIn is huge. Engaging through content gets my attention a lot, liking and commenting, and also just being consistent. I'll tell you this last thing, and I'll end it here. As we know in sales, right? Follow up and consistency beats everything. I've had people give me great outreach, but I forget because I got meetings, I got 10 reps I'm managing. But the people who've consistently just followed up with me, they're the ones who get my attention. I literally had a guy, I'm looking at my screen, follow up with me. It was 2 weeks ago. I forgot to respond. He's trying to move from politics into sales, right? Which is an interesting transition. So that's where that's pretty much how I prefer things when it comes to my outreach.
Yeah. Great perspective. I think maybe even diving deeper here too, right? I think this is something I don't really see. Everyone at this point, it's kind of like common knowledge, right? Like message the hiring manager. It's amazing how literally less than 1% of the 2,000 applicants even did that in the first place. But now for the person that's listening, that is on the ball, that wants to cold call you, that wants to message you, rhetorically speaking here, like what is an example of a good cold call that stands out? And actually, I'll just stop there. Like that's my first question. What's a good cold call? How would you structure that if you're calling the hiring manager? And we'll keep breaking it down from there.
Yeah, so a few different ways, but the main way that I've done it and how I like it, basically I'll call you up and I'll just say like, "Hey, is this Eric?" You say, "Yeah." I say, "Eric, my name is Elijah. I was giving you a call. Correct me if I'm wrong. Are you still hiring for an SDR role over there at Acme Corp?" Person might say yes. Okay, perfect. That's actually why I was giving you a call. I was wondering if I can find 5 to 10 minutes to kind of walk you through why I think I'm a great fit. I know I probably caught you in the middle of something. How do you look next week? Short and simple. That's pretty much plus or minus what most people do with me. And I say, yeah, send me over your resume. Let's schedule something either tomorrow or next week, whenever I have some availability. I will say some objection handling. A lot of people will tell you just quickly go apply and then maybe come back and talk to me. A way some people I've seen rebuttal that, even when I've done it, is like, hey, I would love to apply, but with these systems, I can't always get through, and there's screening issues, etc. I'd love to just get maybe 5 minutes with you, walk you through, and I can send you a Loom video. Everyone who sent me a Loom video, I've gotten them at least a first round interview with my recruiter. I get everyone those first round interviews if you do reach out. So that's pretty much what that looks like. I don't know if you want to break it down further, or like if you want to walk through certain scenarios, you let me know.
Yeah, that's great. Really great perspective. And maybe just on the flip side too, for that person that's like anxious, maybe has never made a cold call ever. Like I think that was a perfect example. And like to some extent, it's pretty much that simple. I might expect if you catch a manager on like a day where they're feeling saucy or whatever you want to call it, maybe they'll give you one quick objection, like, I'm not so sure, and then like see how you handle it. But on the flip side, I am curious if someone goes through the length of getting your phone number, giving you a cold call. I mean, have there been any that were so bad that you couldn't move forward with an interview, or is pretty much that effort right now enough to still secure one? I'm curious what that looks like.
Great question. I had one guy, great guy. He emailed me a lot. He did everything right, but again, I'm big on communication skills over the phone, and he was very, very anxious. And I told him like, hey, look, John, here's what you can do. Just from hearing you right now, and I'm a very candid, blunt person, so I told him like, look, we're going to be calling into enterprise companies. And I told him all this. We're going to be calling to enterprise companies, directors, VPs. I'm not sure that just from what you're conveying to me right now, that you're giving me a lot of confidence in your ability. But I'm happy to at least have like an informal chat with you, 5-10 minutes, where I can kind of help you. I didn't move forward with him with the interview. He's the only person. Everyone else who's reached out to me, I've gotten them at least that first round because of the effort. I want to reward that. And when he called me, I mean, I'll give you an example of like what really happened. He called me up. I said, yes, this is Elijah. He said, my name is and then he was just kind of just going on. And I was trying to be very, very nice to him, but that's an instance that never really happens. That's 1 in a million. So that's an example of when someone really just didn't do a good job. And I'm still in touch with them. I'm still trying to help them out with the process. I just said I don't think it's going to work for my company. I don't know if every manager is going to do that, but I stay in touch with these people because I just try to help them out wherever I can.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And maybe now transitioning that focus to like, so this is a great proxy again for everyone out there of like what it takes to get an interview. However, obviously the work's just getting started. Maybe if it's not too wide open of a question, focusing on that first round, you now have, actually, that's a great question. How many, just from a numbers perspective, how many people are you bringing into that first round interview?
How much have I done since I've been here, or just like on average, or like what percentage
like
move?
Yeah, you put a job listing out on LinkedIn right now. Within the next week, are you trying to get 15 candidates, 20, 50? Like how many first round interviews are you looking to have with different folks?
Yeah. So assuming these are some of the people who have reached out to me, like let's say 10 reached out to me, which is pretty high in a week, all 10 would move forward to a first round just because of the effort that they've put through. If it's through a traditional, they just applied and my recruiter reached out, it's probably gonna be a little higher because it's a numbers game to my recruiter. So that's what that looks like. But one thing I did want to, I should have backtracked. When you're doing the outreach, one thing to really keep in mind is staying organized and having a proper pipeline. I've been big on using Notion and Excel sheets or Google Sheets to be able to manage that. Because going back to the point of follow-up, that's the biggest thing for someone to get your attention, right? If someone's consistently popping up on my LinkedIn, my phone, my email, I'm going to notice you. So I just want to say that point. But going back to your main question, basically, almost 100% of people would move forward if they did reach out to me. When it comes to through just our pipeline of like interviews, I probably would say it's about 30% of people, I think is what I've seen. So if 100 apply, 30 would move forward. Probably not in a week, but over the course of a few weeks.
Gotcha. And then, so let's say, as an example, you interview 30 candidates for this one open role. First question for like that first round interview, right? What are maybe ways that people immediately stand out and are going to that second round? And conversely, any red flags or common mistakes that people are making that pretty much immediately disqualify them?
Yeah, good question. And one thing I want to clarify. So our motion for interviews, the way it goes is to recruiter interview screening, and then it's myself. And then the final stage is a role play with myself and my director. From what I talked to my recruiter, a lot of the time, it's a simple tell me about yourself that a lot of people fail. taking 2-3 minutes telling a life story. Whereas when I talk to my recruiter, I ask him like, what do you prefer? He likes people who are to the point, like, hey, I'll walk you through from when I first started my career to now. What are the metrics that I had? If it's a sales role, if it's not applicable, they will talk about transferable skills to the SDR role. If you're moving from a retailer to an SDR, an engineer, whatever the case may be. A lot of people just blab on for way, way too long. That's the first one where a lot of people fail. The second thing I would say too, actually, what's funny is usually when my recruiter asks like, why tech sales? A lot of people give a very generic answer of like, oh, tech's the future or AI, a lot of those kind of answers. But the ones that we've seen really move forward, I have one candidate, which I'm sure we'll talk about him. He's one of the 15. He had a great story. And I'm sure a lot of this is true, but like, I'm sure he put some nice touch to it where he described like his upbringing was really rough. He wanted to make a lot of money. He wanted to go into a career that was very, I don't want to say just progressive, but it was somewhat future-proof, right? Which is tech sales, you could say that. So he had a great why, and he also tied it into my company, I should say, like with our goals and our initiatives. So that's an example of what you would want to do, and the two questions that a lot of people fail with.
Nice. That's awesome. I know you talked about a lot of generic answers there. So that's good. Maybe just last question on kind of that first round, that screening call with the recruiter. So 30, you interview 30 people. Just to give everyone on the outside looking in, how many typically are you then pulling to that second round?
Good question. Usually it's of that 30, maybe 5 to 8 would actually move through. And of those 5 to 8, usually we do it just so I can have a conversation with them. I would want them to have either basic experiences as an SDR, or if they're new, they have to do really, really good on the screening. Because we're not too picky, because again, it's an entry level role, right? But we do want to be mindful of who we bring on. So typically 5 to 8 people, 5 out of the 30 would move forward.
Gotcha. And that's a great segue too. So you mentioned, and sorry, we're playing like 20 questions here, but I think this is great. Like this is a super deep dive in like all the stuff I wish I knew when I was breaking in. So question there, you mentioned like it's an entry level role. The expectations of past experience are not that high. I'm curious right now, everyone's fear is that there's been layoffs. So there's tons of SDRs with experience on the market, while also simultaneously there's tons of people trying to break in right now. Could you speak to maybe how you weigh, like if I've got a year of experience in any SDR type of role that's tech, maybe not the specific vertical that Docebo is selling in. However, I interview with you, I've got that year of experience versus you've got a candidate that has no direct tech sales or sales experience, but is interviewing well. How do you even begin to like analyze that and make decisions one over the other potentially?
Yeah, great question. At first, when I first came here, I will say I was extremely biased for just wanting to hire people with a bunch of experience. But one thing I quickly realized was just because someone has 2 years, 3 years experience, I've had people with 5 years SDR experience completely bomb the role play, which is the final round, but even just a second round with me. One of the 15, he's a great guy. He actually was the one who reached out to me via LinkedIn. He reached out to what I think 2 SDRs in my company to get my attention. He got my number, called me. He was a bartender for context. Okay. So no real sales experience. He came in, absolutely crushed it, because I know 2 things that he did great was, and kind of like a shameless plug here, he was the type of guy to invest in himself, right? Into a boot camp. Not that you absolutely need those, right? But that boot camp did help him structure and really stand out against people who had 2, 3, 4 years of SDR experience, who didn't do nearly half of the things he did. He sent me a Loom video, a cold call role play of himself with a Hyperbound, I think was the tool he used, as well as just sending me a breakdown of his first 90 days, which that in of itself doesn't have to be perfect, but just that the fact that he did it helped me really understand that he's serious about this career, right? He also had a great why tech sales, why my company, all signs were just pointing towards him. But then conversely, I want to give you an example of someone who had 3 years experience, who came on, asked lousy questions like, what's a day in life? What's the top SDR doing? And that was pretty much it. And he had some decent answers to some questions, but that's just an example of someone who didn't do too well compared to someone who did. So long tangent there, but I just want to say that guy was extremely great, and I just really want to highlight what he did.
Yeah, for sure. I think a great example too, and maybe correct me if it's wrong, but actually kind of what I'm hearing there too is almost in a way, it's not like necessarily a negative, but if someone has 3, 2, even 1 year of SDR experience and comes into this interview, maybe even subconsciously, like your expectations are actually a little bit higher, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like in that instance, like you're like, well, you have 3 years of experience and you're asking me that, like it's pretty softball question. Like, yeah.
Yeah, one of the questions I asked, and I have like a list of interview questions, and it's separated into two categories, right? One, if you have a year and a half plus of experience, versus if you're more junior. The year and a half experience, I would commonly ask, like, hey, if I give you 40 accounts, how would you break it down into focusing on five, right? All those people with 2, 3, 4 years experience, they came from Salesforce, big Oracle companies, where they didn't have to have a real strategy. They didn't know how to answer those questions, right? But again, that guy who I interviewed with, he didn't have the perfect answer, but he had a much greater answer relative to the amount of experience that he had. And one quick thing I did want to just say, Eric, because this was really, really important, was I actually had to turn him down because there was somebody else who was just on paper and from the amount of times I've talked to that person, they did really, really well. And it was going to be easier for me from a rent perspective. So I had to turn him down, but I said, I'll help you find a new job. A week later, he emailed and LinkedIn my VP, and my VP emailed me on Sunday night and said, what's going on with this guy? And I wanted to bring him on, but I just didn't have headcount. So now we're literally opening space for him because he did that. Mind you, bartender, no experience. Yeah, he's gone through a boot camp that helped him structure some things. But this is just a point where, or I'm driving the point home of, if someone says no to you, it's not a no forever. It's literally just a no for now. He literally opened the role. I'm not saying you can do that every time, but I just thought that was really, really important story to drive home, just because of the fact he had no experience. It's a really competitive market, and he just made things happen.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. What a great story. Because I think so many people too hit that rejection, and then they're just like, oh, okay. And like, certainly there's limits. Like, you don't want to look desperate. You don't want to go too over the top, or like, there is a point where it's like, hey, a no is a no. But man, I think this is great perspective for someone who thinks they're trying, quite frankly. I see a lot of people who send that one message, they don't even follow up, and they think, oh, well, they must have taken people with more experience. And then here you have someone who got mid to final round interviews, got a no directly from the hiring manager, and still did not take that for an answer, message the VP, and like still creating opportunities for themselves. Like, that's honestly one of the best stories I've heard. So yeah,
literally that. And one other thing I just wanted to mention as well was on that point of, if they do have more experience, it actually is somewhat tougher for me, because I know if I bring them on, not that I've had this happen yet, but I know from my previous roles, just being an SDR, the more experience someone has, they're going to be very stuck in their ways, right? And that makes it very difficult, because maybe they came from a big company or a small company. When someone's starting blank slate, typically speaking, it's just easier to mold them in the way that you think would be the best for the company. So that's what I've seen with the 4 people that I've hired. And true to my word, all those people did the same process. They reached out to me, and I gave them interviews. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that last point too.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe a quick note too. I mean, obviously higher levels here for those that want more than just the free content we provide. We have Tech Sales Ascension, which helps people break in. You have taken our SDR to AE Accelerator, borderline face of the franchise now. But I'm curious, like, again, a lot of people question, like, is a boot camp worth it? And I think there's some that say, hey, we're a complete alternative to college. There's some, and what I would say, at least representing higher levels, is we are more an accelerant. We give you exactly the things you need to do and how to do them exceptionally well to stand out as a top 1%. We're not, a full-on 4-year university alternative, but we work with people that don't have degrees all the way up to people in their 50s making a career change. Could you speak to, if you value a boot camp, just to make that clear, if you do or not, and then also like, what is the most valuable thing you're seeing from these people if they do elect to take a boot camp? What are the most valuable things they're getting that they're portraying in interviews?
Yeah. So to answer the first part, I personally do value it, considering that I've gone through it, and I know the type of caliber of people that come through those boot camps. Typically speaking, one of the guys actually who I hired went through a boot camp, and he went through yours. But I just know the type of people that, one, it attracts, but also two, who also the type of people that it detracts, right? I mean, depending on the boot camp, obviously I wouldn't pay anything outrageously crazy in the tens of thousands. But if it's for a couple $100, it can help you land a career where you can make 75 to 95,000 plus for your first year. I think it's worth it. Also, what's funny, one of the guys I hired here, he came from a boot camp, did literally everything that I kind of mentioned in that post, right? He reached out to me. He had great questions. He kept following up with me throughout the process, was multi-threading essentially. And essentially I hired him, and he's doing great right now, crushing his ramp quota. So I do value that. As to your second question, you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, was it more so around
like what are the biggest things? Like, so for instance, you mentioned you hired someone that took a boot camp. What were the things that and you mentioned a couple times, they're doing things that people that maybe with 2-3 years of experience that have gotten lazy or stuck in their ways are not doing? What are some of those most valuable things you've seen from people who have taken boot camps?
Yeah. So one of the best things is essentially the bootcamp is also doing the training and the onboarding and ramp for me, right? There's certain things within the product that I have to teach, certain things that I've learned from my experience, but the basic foundations of how to manage an AE relationship, how to structure your day, how to list build effectively, how to call, a lot of those things are being laid to that rep, right? That's went through bootcamp. So for me, it's made it so much easier from the point of view of a hiring manager. I will say this: I know some managers that I've spoken to just across any field, enterprise, SMB, etc., are somewhat turned off, by these boot camps. There's some that are in the market that obviously have not put the best taste in their mouths, right? Because they're just promoting the SDR lifestyle. You can make 100 grand a year working 2 hours a day, things of that nature. So they've been turned off by that, especially if you lead with it. A lot of people that I've spoken to that have done well, they said, yeah, I've gone through a boot camp. It's helped me do this. Whereas some people say like, yeah, this boot camp, I went through it. It was the end all be all. So that's the contrast between what managers like versus don't really like. So that's kind of what I've experienced. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I don't know if you want to probe in there within certain parts, but yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, really well said. I think it's the difference between like a boot camp itself is like a dime a dozen, right? Per se,
Yeah.
like in the sense that like nothing is stopping anyone in theory from purchasing a boot camp on their credit card. Like anyone can do that today. So that does not necessarily make you unique. But I think to your point, if you quickly establish like, hey, I've been interested in tech sales for a long time, to get ahead of this and start preparing for the role, I took a boot camp and that equipped me to do X, Y, and Z. That is the nuance and the difference. It's not just like the sticker on your resume or whatever it might be, but really well said. If there's more there too, feel free. But I think that's really, really well said.
Yeah, no, and I think to that point of like, people kind of treating like a college degree, right? Like, well, hey, I went to college. Well, what do you study? Well, behavioral science or psychology. Like, no offense to psychology majors, but that doesn't really do much for you. It's like, what did you actually do once you had that? Because I've hired people with no degree. I've had someone with an MBA interview, bombed it compared to someone who didn't. It actually went through a boot camp, which is funny. But yeah, that's the final point there. Is like, just don't lead too heavy with it.
Yeah, for sure, man. This has been a great deep dive. I mean, maybe kind of working towards a close doesn't have to be the final question per se, but I think we've covered a lot of like the getting an interview up through the mid stages where, we've got a lot of videos, and I think we've even talked in the past about how to do tell me about yourself and all these things. And you even gave some great examples here. Maybe just a few anecdotes on that final round. I know everyone's final round is different. We don't necessarily have to give away the company secrets here or anything like that. But you've mentioned there have been several people that have bombed it, have not done well. So when it comes to this role play, what things are you expecting? How have people shot themselves in the foot? I'm just curious, maybe a few follow-up questions after that as well.
Yeah. So I personally, I don't understand. I always get confused when people bomb those because I'm the type of person where I tell them what I'm looking for. I send them part of our interview kit, our SDR interviewer kit is we send you 3 cold call videos of people that we like to model their framework with, right, at our company. We also send them questions and ideas of how to ask these questions, right? Because I told you one of the main things, pet peeves that I have is if somebody asks me like, I kind of think of a stupid question that they've asked me, but like, how long you been at Docebo? Like I've literally had somebody ask me that, right? Like I'm not even trying to say that for theatrics, but really, so the basic thing with if you're interviewing at my company, is we're going to send you the material of what to do. It's really just you modeling it. The other thing too that I'm looking for is coachability. I had an interview 2 days ago. The first cold call, the first mock call went decently well. I gave him some feedback. He ended up bombing the second one, which didn't really make sense to me because I think he overthought it. I'm a very patient person. I said, hey, we can do another round. I know you get nervous. So we scheduled it, which was for today, and he bombed it again, which doesn't give me the best signs. He's a very nice guy, but the coachability and the adaptability was huge. The other thing too is like, just don't overthink it. I know it sounds kind of contradictory, but like, don't overthink it when you see a director there. And sometimes we'll have like a third person on the call to kind of be like a panel. A lot of the times, if you do basic research, follow those videos that I've sent. Not every company does that, but if you follow the videos and the frameworks, a lot of that is just going to help you. But it's also a very big sign for us. If you can't follow that video when we're literally giving you the answer, how well you can do in the role, right? I think that's another major thing.
Yeah, and I think I'm oversimplifying too, but one of the things, I mean, just a life principle, I don't want to get too meta here, but I think it's kind of like 80-20, right? A lot of that feedback was very, very great. But I also think in any given, let's just take a standard set of 10 people, you're kind of going to have 80% or so that are like average to below average. And then you're really going to have 2 to 3 maybe that really stand out. And that's where I want to take this next question. And maybe as we kind of wrap up, because the biggest thing we talk about at higher levels, both on the channel and in our community, is like when you are, I mean, at all times for sure, But certainly when you're getting to these final round interviews, your goal should not be to show up to be like good enough. Your goal should be to show up and be the absolute best, leave no doubt, which I know sounds cheesy, but there's actual tactics and things you can do to really do that. And that's my question to you now. As an SDR manager, let's take the scenario if you've been in it, where your final round, you've got 2 or 3 people that perform pretty solid on the cold call mock exercise, whatever it might be. What is that person that ultimately gets the offer doing that is still like everyone else did very, very well? But what is that first person that's getting the first offer from you doing exceptionally well that makes them stand out from the people that are still really good as well?
So it comes down to 3 things in my experience. I literally just gave an offer 2 days ago. The candidate just accepted today. I was just messaging them. The first thing that they do well is ask great questions after the mock call, because we do 45 minutes, 20 is set aside just to do the mock. The 25 minutes after that is going to tell me a lot, things that I need to know about you, right? Because like I mentioned, a bartender can literally beat someone with 4 years of SDR experience because it's literally just happened, right? And one of the questions I actually put it in the post that I wrote on LinkedIn was someone asked me, can you walk me through, or are you comfortable walking me through how to hit my quota over the course of like 90 days, right? Now, some people might say be careful because that's a self-serving question, but if a manager can't answer that, I personally say I wouldn't want to work for them. When he asked me that question, I really had to sit back and think. I said, great question. And I pulled up my docs and I said, this is how I would walk you through, but that's a really great question. Another candidate also asked me, it was more of like from the point of view of a manager, what do I need to understand about your role as a manager to make things easier for you? Because maybe some things I don't see or understand. And both me and my director, we looked at each other, we were thinking like, that's a really great question. So those are the things that helped that person. I actually did extend him an offer. So that's basically the first thing. I know it's kind of a tangent there. Is basically asking great questions. The second thing I would say is also a follow-up, right? You'd be surprised, especially in the final round, right? You would think people would send me an email or LinkedIn, but they oftentimes don't. We literally put in the email for the final round interview. After your interview, make sure to follow up with them, right? And people don't do that. Even if if the interview went well, they did a great mock call and they didn't follow up. I mean, me personally, I'm gonna have to like second guess that person, right? The third thing I would say, for me, I personally just enjoy when someone asks me this question. Is just going for a closing question. I really like when people ask me that. I'm a very blunt person and to the point. I always enjoy those kind of things. But ultimately, it does come down to there is a component of a vibe check as well, right? Like, can we gel with this person? Because as a manager, I really understand the importance of culture and team collaboration. You can be the best person, but if you're an a-hole, like no one wants to work with you. Thankfully, I haven't had anyone on my team like that. So yeah, those are the 3 things that for me kind of boils down to. It's just asking good questions, doing a solid follow-up of a recap, as well as going for the close on the call, and potentially even as you follow up as well.
Nice. I mean, really well said. So many great things there. And yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. Like there's so many ways. It's kind of overwhelming sometimes when you hear all those things, but I think that speaks to kind of like the what it takes. And I think as you get better and better at this, as you just take more shots on goal and get interviews and quite frankly fail, this stuff becomes self-evident. And hopefully this conversation allowed you to learn that before you learn the hard way after 4 rounds of interviews and fail. But no, this is great, Elijah. I guess maybe in closing, we don't have to cap it here per se, but I'm curious if you feel like there's anything we missed, anything else you would highlight to anyone on the outside looking in.
Yeah, 2 things as I'm looking at my post that I made here. One is the resume piece. I've seen a lot of people overstress the resume. I'm not saying you should not put any importance or not send a resume at all, because there is a time and place for that. But I've seen some resumes where it just doesn't make sense for me to read this, right? They're pulling too many things. And usually you can it doesn't pass the sniff test, honestly, when they say I've closed X amount of deals or I've sourced this much pipeline. Quick, simple bullet points lets me look at it and talk to it. I have had a handful of candidates, actually, now that I think about it, not being able to talk to their resume. I remember vividly, I asked somebody, hey, on your resume, it says you increased sales by creating a follow-up campaign by 58%. Can you walk me through what you meant? And I can tell he probably just put that because, AI told him to, for example. So don't put things that you can't talk about is what I would say. I see that a lot. The second thing I would say to kind of wrap it up here is doing some research on just like tech sales in general. On that post, I did plug in you and some other great channels. A lot of people don't understand how tech sales usually works. Now, I know it's kind of a vague term, but what I mean is if you understand that an SDR's whole point is to build pipeline that ultimately converts into paid revenue, right? You can kind of work backwards, like, okay, what are the things I need to do? You can also ask great questions around, what an SDR does and how it fits into the broader, picture of a whole org, right? Like a revenue org. That's one thing I can't stress enough is the questions that you ask is so critical. I can't give you the exact frameworks or exact questions, but I can give you frameworks of how to think about these things. Some of it might be advanced for an SDR role, but I'll give it to you, give to someone here. Is if I'm going interviewing for a company, let's say they're going up market. Typically, I'm sure Eric, you've experienced this where they say they're ready when they're not. I would ask them like, hey, is this a rip and replace model? Is this a open source tool where you can integrate, or is it more so closed off, right? Like I need to understand these things. What is the market looking like? What justified you going up market? These are type of questions you can ask. If anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm an open book on LinkedIn, so feel free to do that. But those are just some of the kind of questions I've asked before when I was interviewing, as well as candidates who've asked me that question that I've loved. So that's the final thing I want to leave it off with.
Man, great way to end. Lots of great nuggets there. So people I think are going to have to like watch this video 2 and 3 times to get it all out. But no, Elijah, this was really great, man. I appreciate it. Obviously appreciate you giving back to higher levels. Like I said, face the franchise now at this point. But no, man, it's been great to see the progress. And I think like will be on record probably the deepest conversation we've had about the hiring process. So right now you hold the baton. If anybody wants to beat that, comment below. Let me know if you're an SDR manager that thinks you can go even deeper in the sauce. But yeah,
I'll appreciate that. I'll be sure to try to disable those comments so no one takes the baton. But appreciate you having me on, Eric. It was great as always. Thank you.